Welcome to an episode of Summary Judgment, actually. And what I'm looking to do today, I posted an episode where I talked about Rakir, as he's one of my favorite heroes from the game, and after that I had someone actually message me and asked how the game was. So they didn't look at the title that closely, but it occurred to me what that person was interested in was an overview of the game and review of the game. And I did do one, but it was around the time of the first Kickstarter, actually, and I feel like it's a good time. And hopefully this is, for some reason my stream is showing yellow while I'm recording this, so if there's an issue, I apologize in advance. But however, it was a year ago that I was able to, that I talked about like what the game was about, basically, like the premise of the game, what I thought of the game, etc., 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 right? And so I want to do that again. I want to do that with a little bit more insight into the game, with having actually played several games. Although in my case, I think I've only played 3v3s thus far, so that could color some of my feedback. But basically, so what is Judgment? So Judgment is, and I've linked to their website below. It's judgment.game, http judgment.game. And Judgment is, from a miniature hobby gamer perspective, Judgment is a skirmish game. Its unique thing, it's played either on a 2-foot diameter circle or a 3-foot diameter circle. If you play in a 2-foot diameter circle, you're playing 3 models versus 3 models. On the 3-foot, you're playing 5 heroes. And the game is based off of the concept of playing a MOBA. MOBA, multiplayer online battle arena. Examples of this are League of Legends, Dota 2, Heroes of the Storm, I think there's one called Smite. There's a couple others that I'm not aware of. And these are all, the idea of these games is they're sort of like team-oriented brawlers. There's some aspects of them that persist into this game and some that don't make sense because of the translation onto the tabletop. The absolute unique thing, and in my opinion, what puts this game head and shoulders above the other skirmish games that I have, I'll say seen mostly because I don't actively play them, but like above them, is that the models are 54mm scale. So for those of you who play War Machine, which is the thing my channel is known for, and the thing I'm known for is fidgeting with my wedding ring and dropping it on the floor. So a standard hero is on the same base size as a large based model from War Machine, so Warjack, Warbeast, and the models themselves, I would say, are, it's not a perfectly analogous because they're obviously very different types of models, but I would say the models themselves actually occupy more, like, as much volume as a very large, like, character beast or jack, or just in general are a little bigger. They occupy more space. They're not necessarily going to be more voluminous. That's why I'm like, it's trying to say that it's not exact. And the models themselves are gorgeous. So so right off the bat, before we even play the game, if you are a painter or hobbyist and you like big gorgeous models that, when you sit down at a table, are really going to showcase just like the hobby part of the game for you. And obviously like terrain and stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit, can be part of that in some games. In this game, if you're the type of person that, like, the height of a hobby game to you is being able to put a small number of models that you've been able to put an extra amount of effort into and make look gorgeous, this is absolutely the game for you. Okay, so I'm back. Sorry, there was a slight interruption while I was recording. There was a knock at the door. I'm home by myself at the moment. Anyway, so as I was saying, if you're into having an army that looks gorgeous with only a few models to potentially paint, you're gonna love this game. I'm not necessarily saying that painting for this game is going to be more or less time consuming than, say, War Machine, Warhammer. I would say it will be more time consuming probably than like Guild Ball or Infinity. Well, it depends. I don't know enough about Infinity or Batman. Just because it's a skirmish game, so you're using a similar number of models, but they're larger. So that's the first thing to talk about. So if you like a game that does that, this is going to be the game for you. Next. Because of that, the game totally revolves. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. Totally revolves around these heroes and the synergies they bring. So the way the game works is it's broken down into. Actually, I'm one step too far ahead of myself. All of the model. There are no factions in this game. There are races, but you don't choose them. You don't choose a race to play this game, right? So if you're familiar with Warhammer. Obviously, there's like 18 factions of Space Marines and like a couple other things. I'm being flippant. I don't know enough about GW games. There's all these. But anyways, there's all these different factions. In War Machine and Hordes, there's things like Circle, Signar, Crix, Mercenaries, etc., etc. Guild Ball has their guilds, and on and on. Malifaux has some rules for construction as well. Judgment is every model is available to you as an option. I mean, you have to own it, of course, but every model is an available model. There is no I collect only orcs or only minotaurs. You could choose to collect only orcs or minotaurs, but you're doing that because you like those models or you have some idea that there's a strategy there, etc., etc. There's no requirement to do that, which is good and bad, right? So, games with factions obviously have sort of they give people an identity in the game to play. In some games, they can be like a design space creator, right? Like because now I'm limiting the interactions that things can have. Whereas in this game, the interactions essentially have to be tested across everything that's available in the game. But the game is smaller and the scope is different, right? So it really works for this game. For War Machine, I think it would be really awkward. Like if you think about the power level of a Warcaster, and then now it can be played with any unit in the game. If you've ever played Who's the Boss in War Machine, you can see why that would be very tricky in a game like this. But it really works for this style of game. Now, so there are 5 races. I just mentioned that. As I said, that's not a restriction. There's a few synergies sometimes where like a certain model will give a bonus to orcs or minotaurs or whatever. But there are 5 races. There's orc. It's easier to do it this way. There's orc, human, elf, dwarf, and minotaur. Those are the 5 races. There's some fluff around why it's those 5, but it's those 5. And they do have uniquenesses to them. Just to give a couple examples, all of the elves are faster and more agile, while the dwarves are a little all over the place, but generally they're slower but have more armor and less agility. And then humans and orcs are sort of towing the middle. And this is just generalizing. Each hero is unique. Which one did I not mention? Minotaurs all have regeneration. You get the idea. So those are the 5 classes. 5 races. Then there are classifications for the heroes. And those classifications are aggressor, defender, soul gazer, and supporter. So 3 of those 4 are going to sound exactly how you'd expect, which is an aggressor is somebody whose focus is primarily dealing damage. Defender is somebody who's more of a tank, more anchory, more trying to keep their army. I'm trying to think. Warband is the word that they use in Judgment. Trying to keep their warband alive, or the squishier parts of the warband alive. Supporters, I think that makes sense. They're ones that support what the list is doing, or they sort of live in. Pardon me. Or they sort of live in the in-between areas sometimes. Some of the supports are more like they heal, some are doing buffs, some are really just sort of like I'm the master of nothing. What is the word that I'm looking for? I don't know. They're good at everything but master of none. And then Soul Gazers, which sort of are going to step on the toes a little bit of supporters in some regard, but they have a very specific mechanic that they're focused on that's key to the game, and we'll talk about that as I talk about it. But essentially, they focus on being good at manipulating souls, which are things that exist in the game. The way the game, like, just to give a brief understanding of what the game is, you are like your role is like a demigod, and this is a battle that's being fought on the shadow plane, and you're summoning your warband in to fight over a key location that exists in the shadow plane, basically to gain power. That's as deep into the fluff as we're going to go for now. There is a lot of cool fluff. If you come from War Machine, Colin Hill, who used to live in Houston, played down at Will Pagani's old store at Asgard, has written the vast majority of it, and it's really neat stuff. And then he's been back in Australia, which is where the game is based, where the owners, the company is based from. So just to give a little bit of a shout out there. So now you have aggressors and defenders, and you play on, like I said, with a 3v3 or 5v5. And there's a bunch of different ways to play. So if you've ever played a MOBA, you are able to... there's a few different ways that you can come to the table to play the game. One is you can just do blind pick. So let's say you, the viewer, and myself, we're going to play on the 2-foot circle, we're going to play a 3v3. I would bring 3 heroes that I own, you bring 3 heroes you own, we play the game. Great. Then there's the pick and ban. So one of the common features, if you're not familiar with MOBAs, is the concept of banning out a hero. And the reason you do that is because either there's a perception of something being too strong, or something that is going to invalidate a strategy that you're going to go for. And so in this game, and just to touch on this, if there is a perception that something is absolutely overpowered, right? There's 2 ways that this game will always keep that in check. One, you could just play it too, and we'll get into that mostly is true, but as I said before, there is no rule, right? Like, so I apologize for people who are watching this who didn't play War Machine. That's like the first and biggest hobby miniature game for me, so I'm going to be using that as a comparison point a lot of times. But so to use that here, you know, if we look at back in Mark 2, Haley 2 was absolutely dominant, and you could switch over to play Signar in order to play Haley, right? But if you were, say, a Circle player, Trollblitz player, you couldn't just go and buy Haley and slot her into your army and play, right? In Judgment, you can do that. You know, if Rakir, who I talked about in the episode prior to this, if Rakir is completely overpowered and wins 80% of his games, you can go buy Rakir too. You put him in your warband, and hopefully you increase your win percentage. Great. Now, and then the second way is you just ban Rakir. Somebody brings Rakir, you ban Rakir. You don't want to deal with it. More often in this game, it's going to be a strategy, right? Like, say they have this piece you don't want to deal with, or a combo that they've set up, you want to break that up, and then, you know, that creates a lot of depth in the an individual game rather than around the broader game itself, as far as how things go. So the pick and ban, again, to use we're going to play the 3v3 game, you viewer and myself. Now I will bring 5 heroes, even though I'm intending to play 3. You will do the same. At the beginning of the game, we'll roll off. I'll ban a hero, you'll ban a hero. And then we will choose our warband of 3 from the remaining 4. And what that does is allow some customization. You get the feelings of the bands. You can sort of adjust. And this does a really cool thing, and it's something that I think a lot of games, and especially games where people want to talk about them outside of the game a lot, right? War Machine is a great example of this. A Magic the Gathering is a great example of this, where we talk about list A or deck A beats deck B or list B, right? But list C beats that, and you sort of get this revolving thing. And then what you get is people trying to sort of like solve the metagame ahead of time rather than win on the table. So like Magic was in my experience the worst for this, right? Like if you go to a major tournament, you mostly know that like there are 2 or 3 decks that you just can't beat, and then but there's 2 or 3 decks you do beat, and those 2 or 3 decks beat the 2 or 3 decks that don't beat you, and the numbers may vary, but you get the idea. And yes, there's a little more nuance to it, but once you got the mechanics of playing down, and then like depending on how your draws went and stuff, like a lot of times that is how it played out. Deck A beats deck B, B beats C, C beats A. Rock, paper, scissors. Maybe there's a 4th cycle in there that could happen, but the deck makes such a huge difference in that environment, right? Then you go to War Machine where you have a list, right? And the play skill of the player starts to matter a lot more. But if you listen to podcasts and stuff, because it's easier to talk about a list than it is your play skill, we talk about this list beats that list a lot, much like the Magic example. But War Machine, how you play that list does make a much bigger difference than how you play the deck in Magic. Not that there is no skill in that in Magic either, there is, but it's not nearly as much as like playing a game War Machine is. Then we go a step farther, and we get something like Judgment. And this is true for many skirmish games, don't get me wrong, but in Judgment, now we're looking at, there's a pick and ban, or there's one more format we'll talk about here in a minute. And that lets me really think about my strategy. It really helps me to know how I'm going to approach playing the game, and it puts the benefit into the hands of a player who understands something more, or has a clever strategy, or has a clever approach to a map or a game. And that's really cool, right? So that gives a lot of depth to this game in a way that might be difficult sometimes to totally talk about. I mean, there's more like micro strategies in there, and so that sort of builds some of the depth into this game, because on the outside you might think like, oh, it's a skirmish game, how much depth could it possibly have? It actually has quite a bit. So that's pick and ban. There's a final format, and that is the full I don't know what they actually call this, but the roster pick. I'm honestly forgetting the name of this, but basically, this is you and your opponent are going to choose from the available heroes. That means you have to have, if you're playing a 3v3, you need a minimum of, I think is it 14 for 3v? No, it should be 10. Yeah, it should be 10. So if you're going to play 3v3, you need 10. If you're going to play a 5v5, you need 14 available heroes. And now what you're going to do is, now there will be no duplicated heroes in the game. We will still spend the time doing the bans that were mentioned, and as the game grows, I think, you know, if you have the full like 20 something, you probably have 2 bans as part of this. But again, you'll do a ban phase where each of you ban, and then you'll alternate picking heroes. And what this does is makes you really adapt your strategy on the fly. I think this is the coolest version of this. If you've played a MOBA and done like a draft, this is really cool. Like I watch competitive Heroes of the Storm on Twitch, or Twitch/YouTube, and honestly, half the time I will pay way more attention to the draft than I do to the people playing the game. So this is a really cool thing, especially if you come from the MOBA area. But like if you come from miniatures, this is also just a unique way to play the game. And it also means, depending on, and this is played competitively, but you know, if you're mostly playing with the same group of people, it also means that as long as between the two of you, you own the whole line, you can always do this, right? Or maybe if you're the person, you know, maybe you have more funds than some of your friends. Like me personally, I own everything that's available now, and I will once the Kickstarter is done as well. If I have a friend over, I can just be like, let's do this, and we can play the game. It's a lot of fun. So that's sort of the list composition aspect. Then as we go into the game, one of the cool things that they have, and this is especially true of the 3v3, is maps are defined. The locations for everything on the map, as I said, true for all 3v3s. The terrain, which there are some small terrain rules, I would say, compared to less than comparable to War Machine, maybe slightly less. Less than some other games like Infinity and Batman, which have some pretty considerable terrain rules. But they are impactful. They definitely still have strategic reasons for being there and so forth. So, But the maps are predefined, and I love this because what it means is now you can have strategies and a metagame revolve around a map. It also means that the game can be balanced around that, right? If we see, in the design of the game, whenever a new map comes out, the designers, developers, and playtesters, they can play games on that map ahead of time and see like, well, we thought we were going to put a forest here, but it turns out like this map ends up being really slow and boring if we do that, right? Or we put this soul pit in a certain place, but it's way too protected. That is actually something that they've talked about, because the 5v5 does not currently have any pre-printed zones. They just have recommendations for terrain on that one. And for that map, one of the very specific things they say to do is not put like a wall within a certain distance of a soul pit, because it means that there are soul gazers in the game who can snipe those souls from like almost pure invulnerability from being able to be killed. And that's not, that's not, the game is unbalanced when that's the case. So by having the predefined, I love the predefined maps, so they do that. The goal of the game, just to go over this, is much like a MOBA, there's a thing called an effigy. And each of you have it. It's the equivalent of your core or whatever else. I don't know what they're called in all the MOBAs. And you have to destroy that to win the game. Now, there's one of two ways to do that. The game does have alternating turns, just to say that, and an overall round. So when you play a round, at the end of the round, the effigy will heal all of the damage you put on it. So you only have one round to kill it, if you're going to do it purely through damage. Depending on the size of the game, the effigy has a different amount of health to adjust to make, to balance that up. So you can try to attack the effigy as if it were another hero. There's some special rules for it, but basically it's the same as attacking. You put the right amount of damage on it throughout your round, and you can win the game. But then there's also an alternate means of victory, and that is souls. And you get souls one of two ways. The maps themselves have areas where the soul will appear throughout the game, and there's rules for how that works. And if you remember earlier, I said there were soul gazers. So what they're experts at is actually picking those up, manipulating those, and there's a role associated with being able to pick up an unbound soul. The other way to gain them is by killing enemy heroes. Whoever gets the killing blow gets a soul. Relatedly, whenever you kill something, you also level up. So one of the cool things about these heroes is they have a bunch of really cool abilities and whatnot, but they also can level up throughout the game. And so like who levels at what time is going to be another aspect of your strategy. But by having a soul on a member of your warband or banked into your own effigy, you actually reduce the health of the enemy effigy permanently. And by permanently, I mean as long as you have that soul, because there are ways you can lose them. So now you have multiple paths to victory. You could, so for example, the souls actually reduce the health of the effigy by 4, and on a 3v3 map, you have 16 health on your effigy. So that means if I get 4 souls first, I will win the game. But it also means I could get 2 souls and put 8 damage on the effigy. So that's your win condition. From there, and there's only so many. I don't want to get too deep into this, but from there, a lot of stuff is really simplified, but still allows for a lot of depth of play. You have it has custom dice, and those allow you to work on what your how you hit, and some extra maneuvers you have access to. The activation sequence is super simple. Is one of the things I love about it. You get 3 actions, and you can do with those actions whatever you have access to. So unlike something like War Machine where you walk and then attack, right, or you charge or whatever, not the case here. You get 3 actions. You could make a movement. Pardon me, I'm going to drink something real quick. You can make a movement for all 3 of your actions. You can make an attack for all 3 of your actions. You can move, then charge. You can charge, then move. You can, et cetera, right? You can make 3 ranged attacks, 3 magic attacks, 3 melee attacks. You can do some special actions that are on your card. You can do some actions that are allowed by all heroes, all heroes, etc. So that's really cool. Additionally, there is a a currency in the game called fate, and you can gain that a number of ways, and I'm not going to go all into it, but some of the more powerful abilities in the game use fate. There's some generic abilities that use fate, and this is another aspect of the game that's really going to be what separates the people from out into being better and better at the game, is knowing when to use fate, how to think about your warband and how much fate it needs, where to generate fate from, and so forth. And then the final, not the final, there's two more things that are unique to it. One, much like some MOBAs, not all, there are items that can be purchased. So this means there are things that you can, and it costs fate to do this as well, that you can give to the members of your warband, and there's rules for how you do that. And these are basically going to be stat enhancers. You can have one offensive and one defensive item assigned to each hero, and they can't be shared, and they're shared across your warband. And by that I mean, for example, one of the weapons is the Vorpal Blade, and that gives you +1 to your melee. You can't have 2 Vorpal Blades in your warband. Your opponent can have a Vorpal Blade, you can have a Vorpal Blade, but you can't have 2 heroes that have a Vorpal Blade. So that's just something to consider. Sorry, catching my breath there. So that's one other unique thing, and that's a very important part of the game as well. And then the final part of the game that sets it apart is there's also neutral monsters on each map. Again, this is something that you'll see. There's mercenary camps and boss camps and so forth in MOBAs, and this is similar to that. Different maps. Again, this is where the pre-drawn maps are a really big deal, because now where that monster is going to be very impactful potentially in relation to some of the other things going on. And the cool thing about those monsters is they have what I would call a pretty simplistic AI, but it gives you another interesting way to approach the game, because now I can throw, it will attack heroes that are near it, but also I can manipulate the game in such a way to push your hero into him, or into the neutral monster, and then the neutral monster will attack it. So that's another way that you can influence how the game is played and what the outcome of it is. All in all, this adds up to a really fun experience, and has sort of one of the final awesome things about it too is it has very little setup. For War Machine, I have to set up the scenario, then I got to put terrain on top of it. If I'm setting up a tournament, I have to set up half as many tables as people as I have. There's guidelines now for how to do that, but I need to find a bunch of terrain. I need to set it up. I need to put it out there. I need to make sure that it's all correct. I got to check it between rounds, etc. And even for myself, right? Like if I want to play a game War Machine at the shop, I gotta go. I gotta again put my scenario down. I gotta put the terrain down, and that's not to say that any of this is a huge deal, right? And then I gotta put my whole army down. I mean that's part of the game, but in this game, it's one of the really nice things about it is I can roll out the 2 foot by 2 foot neoprene, sit across, and you can usually sit to play these games too, which is nice, especially the smaller games. I sit across from my opponent. We roll it out. We deploy our heroes. There's a few things that are neutral that have to get placed. I have to place the neutral monsters, some shrines, which are one of the ways that you get fate. I think they're on all the maps actually. So you place a shrine. You're going to place your neutral monster or monsters. You're going to place your effigies. You're good to go. Game can start, or you can start drafting, whichever the case may be. You can play. It's ready. That's it. That's all there is. And for a skirmish game, that's really unusual, right? Like Batman, Infinity, Malifaux all have lots of terrain. GW games, lots of terrain. And don't get me wrong, having a lot of terrain can definitely be a lot of fun, right? It's very visually impactful. It's just cool looking, right? But there's also something to be said for, I want to sit down and play this game right now. And that's something you can do with this game. So, anyways, to sort of wrap up my overview, I think this is a pretty good length. But to sort of start to wrap up my overview or re-overview of the game, it's just a lot of fun. You get a lot more depth of strategy than you might imagine on the outside of it. But you also I would say, are in a situation where it's pretty approachable as well. I've played games with my wife, for example. She does not play. She has played War Machine, but for the most part, she doesn't play a ton of War Machine. And honestly, like she's perfect. I think we're like even on wins on the game, and I definitely like analyze games and stuff more. So I haven't got as in depth on this as I have on like War Machine. You know, obviously, if I play a bunch more games and she doesn't, that would be expected to change. But I would say it's very approachable. And I will address the one thing that sometimes I hear people staying out of the game from, which is that they see the price tag on the game and they sort of get worried. And I would say, yes, this is going to cost, like Guild Ball you can get into for like $100 to get a faction starter that's enough to play the game. Absolutely. Malifaux, I don't know the prices on stuff. I would be willing to bet you can probably start into the game around that. For Judgment, in USD, you're looking at roughly $50-ish a model. And you need a minimum of 3 models to play the game. So, for skirmish games, is that expensive? Yes. For miniature war games, is that expensive? No. I would say if you're buying into War Machine today to be competitive, you're in for no less than $1,000. Now, you can do that slowly, of course, but I'd say you're in for no less than $1,000. So for Judgment, you're probably looking at a couple $100 to really get there. But what you're getting in exchange for that is actually really awesome models, and that's a big part of this game. So, and I've had this debate with a few people who are like, well, it seems to me that the direction of games right now is going to smaller model counts, smaller models, cheaper barrier to entry, lower hobby requirements, and so forth, right? It's like Steamforge's like playbook on that. Privateer Press is certainly doing some things in that regard. There's Shadespire from GW. There's definitely a bunch of games that fit that niche, and that's great. What I would say is this game is not targeted for somebody who's looking for an absolutely lowest barrier to entry. I would say the barrier to entry, financially that is, the barrier to entry for this game is lower than War Machine, certainly, right? There's going to be, what is it? It's like, let's say 25 or so heroes at, once this all goes. So Wave 1 has completed their 15 heroes in the game right now that are purchasable. And then when Wave 2 completes, there will be an additional 12. So I think there'll be 27 plus some neutral monsters. So you're looking at maybe around, we'll call it 30 models, even if those are $50 a piece, which I think is a pretty decent average. Right, so 100 for every 2. You're in the couple $1,000s to own. No, that's not right, is it? Yeah, $50. $100 gives you 2 models. So then 1,000 gives you 20. No, it's $1,500 for $1,500. Sorry, streamer math. For $1,500, you'll have the entire game, and you don't even necessarily need to have the entire game. That's a you choice. You certainly don't have to have it all right away to play it. And there is a starter set that will be coming out in the fall when this goes live again. So that's going to be really cool. And then their plan is really the other thing with this is their plan is to basically only release 1 to 2 models basically quarterly. So that's going to put you, again, once you've gotten into the game, and I know like War Machine has sort of slowed down their development, for example, but if you were keeping up with 1 or 2 factions of War Machine, you easily were spending that much or more, right? Like a unit of like a unit of Wolves of Ouroboros for Circle, which is what I play if you've watched my channel at all, is like $50. And yeah, there's like 12 models in there, or 10. You don't get the attachment. There's 10 models in there. But none of them are to the detail of one of these models, and you're still like not thinking twice before potentially going like, oh, I need another unit of Wolves of Ouroboros, or I need another unit of this or that in War Machine. So I do think the price point is not aimed at somebody who's looking for the lowest for the cheapest game to get into, but it's right where it needs to be. You're getting really awesome models for a good price, and you don't need a lot of them to play the game. So, and it's definitely something, if you and a buddy are looking to get into a game, it's pretty easy to split and both get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And, you know, most tournaments are going to be things like the pick and ban that I mentioned. So you're going to need, if you do the 5v5s, you'll need 7 heroes, or the 3v3s, you'll need 5. And you can start there, right? And the 3v3s are perfectly fine. It's really, it's really a lot of fun to play. I would say a 3v3 once you get it down, as long as you don't, you know, stall out too much. You can play in roughly an hour-ish. I put it maybe an hour and a half for the full game. You know, you're not going to go over the amount of time that you're going to play a War Machine game playing this. And I think as time goes on, you can play it faster. And I do think, I know they've used the clock in their games. I'll have to see as their like tournament stuff is happening more and more what the timing is. So anyways, that's an overview of Judgment. I recommend it. I think it's a ton of fun. I'm really hoping that I can get more games in with it. One of the shops local to one of the suburbs here in Chicago actually is one of the backers for the game, and I keep like not being able to make it up to their store. Just sort of a combination of their hours and my availability. In fact, there's a tournament there next Sunday from the time of this recording, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it because I'm really going to be busy that Saturday, and being gone 2 days in a row on one weekend like that is maybe not going to happen, unfortunately. So poor timing for me, but is what it is. So anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. A lot of fun. I definitely recommend it. If you have any questions, the Full Circle channel is certainly available to have more conversations about this. There's also a Judgment Discord, so hop on that. There's 2 groups if you're around Chicago. There's a Chicagoland Judgment group. Jump in there. That's on Facebook, sorry. Jump in there. We can talk all you want about Judgment and trying to get games. There's also a Facebook group called Judgmental, which is for everybody. That one's run by the people. I'm an admin on the first group I mentioned. The other one is run by the Judgment guys, the company. And there's a lot of great conversation there. Same on the Discord. They post a lot of stuff. It's a really awesome game, and I think this fall when the rest of the models come out, I think it's going to take off from there. So I've already been very pleasantly surprised with the growth that it's had, and especially given that it's in a very unique space. So as always, thanks for watching. Certainly hit me up, and we'll talk more about this on social media. And I'll probably be doing a few more of the hero review episodes, and maybe we'll get into more than that as time progresses. And of course, thanks for watching.